Why do so many men fear women? At first glance, the question sounds absurd. Men are, on average, physically stronger. They have held political power for most of recorded history. And yet across cultures, myths, religions, and literature, woman appears again and again not merely as an object of desire, but as a force of danger. She is portrayed as temptation, as seduction, as chaos, as distraction, as moral corruption, as the one who weakens, ensnares, humiliates, and destroys. But what if this fear has never really been about women alone? What if the fear of woman is, in part, a fear of what woman awakens in man? Need, longing, dependency, vulnerability, loss of control, and the return of emotional forces he has spent his life trying to master, deny, or bury. In this video, we will examine the fear of women through modern psychology, neuroscience, anthropology, and Stoic philosophy. We will explore why desire so often turns into resentment, why dependency can mutate into contempt, why some men try to control what they secretly feel powerless before, and why the woman a man fears is often the external image of an inner conflict he cannot yet face. This is not a defense of misogyny, and it is not an attack on masculinity. It is an attempt to understand one of the oldest tensions in human life. Why men are drawn toward women with such intensity and yet so often fear the very closeness they seek. This is Stoic psychology. Let's begin. The relationship many men have to women is marked by a contradiction they rarely understand. They desire women intensely. They seek love, sex, approval, admiration, validation, tenderness, emotional refuge. And yet beneath this longing, there is often another current moving in the opposite direction: fear. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of inadequacy, fear of dependence, fear of being emotionally exposed, fear of being seen too clearly, fear of wanting too much. And this is where the problem begins. Because the more intensely a man wants something from a woman, the more power she appears to have over his inner state. His self-respect becomes vulnerable to her approval. His mood becomes vulnerable to her attention. His sense of worth becomes vulnerable to whether he is desired, chosen, admired, or abandoned. The Stoics understood a principle that applies with full force here. We suffer when we hand our inner stability over to what we do not control. A man who has made female attention the regulator of his worth does not simply desire women. He fears them because he fears the power they now possess over his peace of mind. Modern neuroscience helps explain why this vulnerability can feel so overwhelming. Romantic attraction activates some of the same neural systems involved in craving, anticipation, reward, and addiction. Dopamine surges in the brain's reward circuitry when we anticipate affection, sexual intimacy, reciprocation, or emotional closeness. Oxytocin and vasopressin deepen attachment. The amygdala tracks threat and rejection. And the anterior cingulate cortex, an area involved in social pain, can respond to romantic rejection in ways that overlap with physical pain. In other words, love and desire do not remain in the realm of abstract thought. They penetrate the body. They alter attention, motivation, emotional regulation, and even one's sense of self. This is one reason romantic life can make otherwise competent men behave irrationally. A woman can become not merely a person, but a psychological event, a source of hope, a source of dread, a source of self-expansion, a source of self-collapse. And when a man lacks inner discipline, self-knowledge, and emotional resilience, he often responds to this vulnerability in one of three ways. The first is idealization. He places woman on a pedestal. He imagines that if he could only be loved by the right woman, his loneliness would disappear, his doubts would quiet, his life would finally feel whole. In this state, he does not relate to women as real human beings. He relates to them as emotional saviors. The second response is avoidance. He distances himself from intimacy. He hides behind irony, detachment, pornography, casual sex, workaholism, or emotional numbness. He tells himself that women are manipulative, relationships are traps, and vulnerability is weakness. But often this cynicism is not strength. It is armor. The third response is resentment. When longing meets frustration and vulnerability turns into shame, some men stop saying, "I am hurt," and begin saying, Women are the problem. This is a crucial psychological transformation. Pain that is not understood tends to search for a target. And when a man cannot bear the humiliation of his own need, he may turn against the person who evokes it. He resents her because he desires her. He resents her because he needs her. He resents her because he cannot control what happens inside him when she is near, when she leaves, when she chooses someone else, or when she simply fails to heal the emptiness he hoped she would heal. The Roman Stoic Seneca warned that the passions distort judgment. When we are ruled by fear, desire, envy, or anger, we no longer see reality clearly. We interpret events through the lens of emotional disturbance. And so a man who is inwardly unstable does not merely experience attraction. He experiences attraction as threat. The woman becomes dangerous not because she is inherently dangerous, but because she awakens unmastered forces within him: dependency, insecurity, possessiveness, shame, and fear of not being enough. This is why desire so easily flips into contempt. What is worshipped one day can be demonized the next. The same woman who seemed divine when she offered validation can seem cruel when she withdraws it. This is not love. It is not strength. It is not masculine authority. It is dependency mixed with pride, longing mixed with shame, need mixed with resentment. And until a man can face the emotional forces women awaken in him without blaming women for those forces, he will remain divided against himself. But to understand why this division runs so deep, we have to go further back, to the earliest relationship of his life, the bond with the mother. To understand why some men react to women with such ambivalence, longing on one side, fear and resentment on the other, we have to look at the earliest architecture of male emotional life. Before a boy learns what masculinity is supposed to be, before he has a public identity, before he can even name his own feelings, he lives in profound dependence on the mother. She is nourishment, warmth, regulation, safety, the first face of comfort, the first source of soothing, the first emotional world. For the infant, the mother is not simply another person. She is the environment of life itself. From the perspective of attachment theory, this early bond becomes one of the deepest templates for later intimacy. How safe it feels to need someone, how tolerable closeness is, how one responds to absence, inconsistency, engulfment, frustration, and separation. And for boys, this creates a peculiar developmental challenge. Because the boy must do something psychologically difficult. He must separate from the maternal world while still carrying within himself the emotional imprint of that world. He is born from dependence, but he is often taught to become a man by denying dependence. He is shaped by tenderness, but he is often taught to become masculine by distrusting tenderness. He longs for closeness, but he may later feel ashamed of how much he longs. This conflict is one reason the feminine can become psychologically charged. If a man has not integrated his need for comfort, receptivity, softness, emotional reliance, and vulnerability, then these traits do not disappear. They go underground. And what is buried within often returns from without. It returns in the form of attraction to women who seem to embody what he has cut off from himself: nurturance, beauty, warmth, sensuality, emotional depth, surrender, mercy, belonging. But because these qualities are tied to dependency, and dependency can feel humiliating to a man whose identity is built around control, the attraction becomes unstable. He wants what she represents, but he also fears what wanting her reveals about him. Psychodynamically, this is where the mother complex enters the picture. The term does not mean that every man with relational problems is secretly obsessed with his mother in a crude sense. It means that unresolved emotional patterns formed in the maternal bond can continue to shape adult relationships in ways the man does not understand. He may unconsciously seek in women the unconditional soothing he once received as a child. He may become enraged when real women fail to provide it. He may oscillate between craving care and despising himself for needing it. He may expect women to calm anxieties that he has never learned to regulate on his own. And then, when the woman inevitably proves to be human, limited, flawed, separate, unavailable, or unwilling to carry the burden of his unmet emotional needs, he experiences not just disappointment, but betrayal. The old dependency wound is reopened. the old helplessness returns. And because helplessness is intolerable to pride, it can quickly convert into blame. Modern neuroscience adds another layer to this picture. Early attachment experiences shape stress regulation, emotional expectations, and sensitivity to rejection. If a child grows up in an environment where love is inconsistent, intrusive, shaming, or emotionally chaotic, the nervous system may learn that intimacy is both desired and dangerous. This creates a painful double bind. The person longs for closeness, yet closeness activates fear. In adulthood, such a man may be magnetized by women, while simultaneously becoming suspicious, defensive, controlling, or avoidant once real intimacy begins. He may say he wants love, but what he often wants is the comfort of fusion without the vulnerability of mature relationship. He wants to be soothed without being seen as weak, wanted without risking rejection, held without surrendering control, loved without having to confront the frightened child still living inside the adult personality. This is one of the great hidden tragedies of male psychology. A man can spend years believing that women are manipulative, confusing, disloyal, or impossible to understand, while never recognizing that what terrifies him most is not woman herself, but the dependent, vulnerable, emotionally unguarded part of himself that awakens in her presence. The Stoics would have recognized the danger of this condition immediately. To be ruled by what one refuses to examine is to live in servitude. To blame the external world for the storms one carries within is to remain a stranger to oneself. And to demand from another person the emotional security one has not cultivated inwardly is to guarantee resentment. If the male fear of women has deep roots in dependency, then the next question is unavoidable. What happens when a man cannot tolerate his own dependency, vulnerability, and need? Very often, he projects them outward. And once projected outward, they return to him wearing the face of woman as enemy. When a man cannot accept certain impulses, needs, or weaknesses within himself, he is faced with a painful choice. He can turn inward and confront them, or he can project them outward and declare that the problem lives somewhere else. Projection is one of the oldest defense mechanisms of the human mind. What we cannot bear in ourselves, we are tempted to locate in other people. Our aggression becomes their malice. Our instability becomes their chaos. Our forbidden desire becomes their seduction. Our weakness becomes their corruption. This is one reason the image of woman has so often been burdened with male anxiety. Across history, woman has been portrayed not merely as attractive, but as dangerous precisely because she appears to awaken impulses men struggle to govern: lust, tenderness, dependency, jealousy, possessiveness, obsession, moral confusion, and fear of surrender. The woman becomes the mirror in which a man sees not only what he wants, but what he cannot master. And because that experience is humiliating, he may begin to narrate it in a way that protects his pride. He does not say, "I feel weak in the presence of desire." He says, "She is manipulative." He does not say, "I am terrified of abandonment." He says, "Women are disloyal." He does not say, "I want to be chosen so badly that rejection wounds my identity." He says, "Women are cruel." Notice what is happening here. A private conflict becomes a public accusation. An internal wound becomes a theory about the opposite sex. A man who cannot metabolize shame turns psychology into ideology. This is why fear of women often appears together with obsession over female sexuality. Sexuality is not merely physical. It is destabilizing. It can bypass the intellect and expose the body to longing, fantasy, vulnerability, comparison, and loss of control. It can evoke primitive feelings of possession, inadequacy, and dependence. It can make a man feel ridiculous, needy, replaceable, and powerless all at once. And for a psyche organized around invulnerability, this is intolerable. So the mind searches for a solution. If I feel weak in relation to women, then perhaps women are dangerous. If desire makes me unstable, then perhaps female sexuality is corrupting. If I am ashamed of my dependency, then perhaps the feminine itself is the threat. This is the psychological soil from which many fantasies of the destructive woman grow. The seductress, the femme fatale, the siren, the witch, the manipulator, the gold digger, the temptress who ruins men. Such images persist because they perform a function. They convert inner conflict into external danger. They allow a man to fear woman instead of facing his own fragmentation. They allow him to moralize his wound rather than heal it. Jung observed that what is unconscious is often first encountered as fate. What we refuse to know within ourselves appears outside us in exaggerated and often threatening form. A man who has not integrated his own emotionality, tenderness, receptivity, sensuality, or dependency may come to experience these qualities as alien and dangerous when embodied by women. The feminine then appears not as compliment, but as invasion, and shame intensifies the whole process. Because many men are not merely afraid of women. They are ashamed of the kind of man they become in the presence of a woman they desire. Ashamed of how needy they feel. Ashamed of how jealous they become. Ashamed of how quickly they abandon principles for approval. Ashamed of how deeply rejection cuts. Ashamed of how much power they secretly give away. Shame rarely stays still. It seeks relief. And one of the easiest forms of relief is contempt. If I can look down on the woman I desire, I no longer have to feel small before her. If I can reduce her to a stereotype, I no longer have to face the complexity of my dependence. If I can call her shallow, evil, narcissistic, manipulative, or corrupt, I can momentarily avoid the more painful truth that I do not yet know how to remain inwardly free in the presence of what I love. This is why contempt is often a mask for wounded attachment, and why hostility toward women is so often entangled with fascination, envy, longing, and grief. Hatred is not always the opposite of desire. Sometimes it is desire that has been humiliated, frustrated, and armored. The Stoics would insist that the task here is not to purge desire, nor to become cold, detached, and incapable of love. It is to become capable of desire without enslavement, capable of intimacy without self-betrayal, capable of attraction without projection, capable of admiration without worship, capable of rejection without collapse, capable of pain without revenge. But to do that, a man must first admit something difficult. The woman he fears may be carrying his shadow, and until he takes it back, he will continue fighting in women what he has not yet integrated in himself. At this point, the Stoic question becomes unavoidable. What exactly is the man afraid of? Is he afraid of women themselves? Or is he afraid of what happens inside him in relation to women? The Stoics were ruthless in separating external events from internal judgments. For them, freedom begins when we stop confusing what happens to us with what we tell ourselves about what happens. A woman rejects you. That is an event. You tell yourself, I am not enough. That humiliation is unbearable. She has exposed my weakness. I must regain control. Women are dangerous. Those are judgments. A woman leaves you. That is an event. You tell yourself, I cannot survive abandonment. My worth depended on being loved by her. If I cannot possess what I desire, then desire itself is the enemy. Those are judgments. From a Stoic perspective, what many men fear is not woman as such, but for inner experiences they have not learned to bear with dignity. First, they fear dependency. To need someone is to become vulnerable to uncertainty. You cannot command affection. You cannot guarantee loyalty. You cannot force desire. And if your emotional life is built on control, then love feels like danger because love exposes the limits of control. Second, they fear rejection. Not merely because rejection hurts, but because they have fused rejection with identity. A woman's disinterest becomes proof of inadequacy. A breakup becomes evidence of personal worthlessness. Silence becomes humiliation. Distance becomes annihilation. The Stoics would call this a category error of the soul. You are treating another person's will as the measure of your value. Third, they fear emotional exposure. To love sincerely is to reveal need, tenderness, longing, and uncertainty. It is to risk being seen where you are not armored. And many men have built their masculinity around the avoidance of exactly this state. So rather than risk being seen, they become ironic, detached, sexually compulsive, emotionally withholding, or domineering. They would rather be feared than vulnerable, desired than known, in control than intimate. Fourth, they fear the collapse of the persona. A man may spend years constructing an identity of competence, independence, stoicism, rationality, and invulnerability. Then one relationship, one betrayal, one obsession, one humiliation, one unrequited love can expose how fragile that identity really is. He discovers that beneath the persona there is panic, need, rage, jealousy, dependency, a child's terror of not being chosen. And rather than grieve this discovery, he may harden against women, because women have become associated with the collapse of his self-image. But this is precisely where Stoicism offers something far more demanding than misogyny, cynicism, or avoidance. Stoicism does not say, blame women less. It says, govern yourself more. Examine your judgments. Discipline your desires. Stop asking the external world to guarantee inner security. Do not build your peace on what can leave. Do not make another person the keeper of your dignity. Do not confuse longing with love, control with strength, or resentment with wisdom. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminds himself that external things have no power to stain the soul unless the soul surrenders its power of judgment. Epictetus insists that the path to freedom lies in distinguishing what is up to us from what is not. A woman's thoughts are not up to you. Her desires are not up to you. Her loyalty is not fully up to you. Her love cannot be demanded. Her presence cannot be guaranteed. But your conduct is up to you. Your interpretation is up to you. Your restraint is up to you. Your honesty is up to you. Your capacity to endure disappointment without malice is up to you. This is why the Stoic solution to fear of women is not emotional numbness. It is self-possession, not the refusal to love, but the refusal to become a slave to what love awakens. Not the rejection of desire, but the discipline of desire. Not the denial of pain, but the ability to bear pain without distortion. Not contempt for women, but mastery over the weakness that tempts a man to blame women for what he has not mastered in himself. And once this shift occurs, something important changes. Woman no longer appears as savior or destroyer. She becomes what she always was. Another human being, complex, imperfect, capable of love and cruelty, honesty and manipulation, loyalty and betrayal, just like men. The fantasy dissolves. The projection weakens. The moral panic fades. And in its place, a harder but healthier task emerges. To relate to women not from hunger, fear, worship, resentment, or domination, but from clarity, self-respect, restraint, and truth. If fear of women is often rooted in dependency, projection, shame, and lack of self-mastery, then the solution is not to become colder, harder, or more cynical. The solution is to become more conscious, more honest, more disciplined, more inwardly free. So let's end with a practical framework. Not for manipulating women, not for becoming emotionally invulnerable, but for reducing fear, resentment, and projection, and for building a masculinity capable of intimacy without collapse. Step 1. Name the fear precisely for the next week. Every time you feel anger, anxiety, contempt, jealousy, or obsession in relation to a woman, stop and ask, what exactly am I afraid of right now? Not in theory. Precisely. Am I afraid of being rejected? Of not being enough? Of losing control? Of being replaced? Of needing someone more than I want to admit? Of being seen in my weakness? Of not being chosen? Most men stay trapped because they keep the fear vague. And vague fear quickly becomes ideology. The more precisely you name the fear, the less power it has to disguise itself as truth about women. Step 2. Separate the woman from the wound. The next question is, what in this reaction belongs to the present woman and what belongs to my past? Am I reacting to her actual behavior? Or to old shame, old abandonment, old humiliation, old maternal deprivation, old insecurity? This is one of the most important disciplines a man can develop. Because if you do not distinguish the woman in front of you from the wound she activates, you will punish real people for injuries they did not create. Write it down if necessary. What did she actually do? What story did I tell myself about it? What older feeling did it awaken? This is how projection begins to weaken. Step 3. Reclaim your dependency. Many men try to solve vulnerability by denying it. They say they do not need anyone. They act detached. They hide behind irony, casual sex, compulsive self-improvement, or emotional withdrawal. But denied dependency does not disappear. It returns as resentment, obsession, control, and shame. A better question is, Where am I emotionally dependent in ways I refuse to admit? Do I need female approval to feel masculine? Do I collapse when attention is withdrawn? Do I use romantic validation as a substitute for self-respect? Do I expect women to regulate emotions I have never learned to regulate myself? Dependency becomes dangerous when it is unconscious. When it is seen clearly, it can be worked with. Step 4. Practice stoic detachment from outcomes. This does not mean becoming indifferent. It means refusing to build your identity on what you cannot control. A woman may desire you, or not, stay, or leave, understand you, or misunderstand you, be loyal, or betray you. Your task is not to control those outcomes. Your task is to remain honorable regardless of them. Ask yourself daily, did I speak truthfully? Did I act with dignity? Did I respect boundaries, hers and mine? Did I allow desire to make me dishonest? Did I become manipulative when afraid? Did I betray myself for approval? That is Stoic practice in the realm of relationships. Step 5. Build a life that does not revolve around female validation. One reason some men fear women so intensely is that too much of their identity hangs on being desired. If romance is your only source of meaning, then rejection becomes catastrophe. If sexual validation is your proof of worth, then female choice becomes tyrannical. If intimacy is the only place you feel alive, then every loss becomes existential. So build a wider life, a disciplined body, meaningful work, male friendship, creative purpose, solitude that does not feel empty, spiritual depth, a relationship to suffering that does not immediately seek sedation. The less your entire identity depends on female approval, the more freely you can love without fear. Step 6. Learn to tolerate vulnerability without contempt. This may be the hardest step. Can you admit that you are hurt without becoming cruel? Can you feel jealousy without turning punitive? Can you be rejected without degrading the woman who rejected you? Can you need love without despising yourself for needing it? The mature man is not the man who feels nothing. He is the man who can feel deeply without losing honesty, proportion, and restraint. He can say, I am hurt. I am disappointed. I wanted more. I feel ashamed. I feel rejected. I feel afraid. And yet he does not turn those feelings into accusations about female nature itself. Step 7. Integrate the feminine inwardly. If a man has spent his life splitting himself in two, strength on one side, tenderness on the other, control on one side, receptivity on the other, masculinity on one side, emotional need on the other, then every woman will carry part of his disowned psyche. And as long as she carries it, he will not be free. So the final task is integration. To become a man who can remain masculine without waging war on softness, strong without worshiping hardness, disciplined without emotional deadness, independent without contempt for need, erotic without domination, loving without servility. This is where the fear of women begins to end. Not when women change, not when relationships become painless, not when rejection disappears, but when a man is no longer terrified of the parts of himself that women awaken. Final practice, a 7-day reset for the next 7 days. Do this every evening. Take 10 minutes and journal 3 questions. 1. When today did I feel emotionally triggered by a woman or by the thought of women? 2. What was the deeper fear beneath that reaction? Rejection, dependency, shame, loss of control, abandonment, inadequacy. 3. What would a Stoic response have looked like in that moment? Then end with one sentence. Tomorrow, I will not blame others for emotions I have not yet learned to govern. Do this for 1 week honestly, and you will learn more about your psychology than most men learn in years. Final insight: the fear of women is often not a fear of women at all. It is a fear of longing, a fear of dependence, a fear of humiliation, a fear of rejection, a fear of emotional exposure, a fear of the child still living beneath the man, a fear of the parts of the psyche that do not obey the ego's demand for control. And this is why no amount of blaming women will solve it. Only self-knowledge can do that. Only discipline can do that. Only the willingness to look inward, rather than merely accuse outward, can do that. The man who has not mastered himself will always be tempted to fear what stirs him. The man who has mastered himself can love without worship, desire without servitude, lose without collapse, and suffer without hatred. That is not weakness. that is freedom. If this video resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where fear, resentment, dependency, or projection may still be shaping your relationships. The point is not to become less human. It is to become less ruled by what you refuse to understand. If you want more videos on Stoicism, psychology, masculinity, shadow work, Jung, and self-mastery, subscribe and let me know in the comments what topic you'd like explored next. This is Stoic Psychology. Until next time.